I think that this country, the United States of America, was founded on ideas about personal freedom, about what people had the right to do and what the government didn't have the authority to stop. That had to do with free speech, political ideas, religious beliefs, and we think it also has to do with sexual freedom. We think it has to do with what you choose to eat and drink, and that so long as you are not forcing anybody to do anything against their will or hurting anybody physically, what you put into your own body, whether it's unhealthy food or unhealthy drink, is not the government's business. And when the government makes it its business, it ends up violating people's privacy, it ends up violating people's space, and it ends up imprisoning millions of people who have done nothing criminal. The second reason is because when the government has that kind of power, it gets to choose its targets. And in this country, 80% of the people who use illegal substances are white, and 80% of the people who are arrested and put in prison for it are black or Latino. That is an enormous outrage, and it has resulted in robbing people of their right to vote, robbing people of their lives, robbing families of their husbands and their brothers, and it is a racial outrage second to none since the end of Jim Crow in this country. So it's not just that it's a violation of individual freedom, it's a violation which is targeted disproportionately upon people of color. And those are the major reasons why this is an issue of passion and commitment for me.
Welcome, welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. Our guests today on the show have been in the forefront of a long-standing movement that seeks to chart a more humane, rational, fact-based course for how we see drugs in our society. It's a course rooted in personal freedom without social stigma. It's a radically different vision of the possibility of their use to enrich, enhance, and help us lead fuller, more productive, and happier lives. It's a movement that draws on decades of research to argue definitively that the criminalization and demonization of drug use, not drugs themselves, have been a tremendous scourge in America, reinforcing its enduring structural racism. Carl Hart is the Ziff Professor of Psychology in the Departments of Psychology and Psychiatry at Columbia University. He's a former chair of the department and a research scientist at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, where he's published numerous scientific and popular studies in the area of neuropsychopharmacology. He's a co-author of the textbook Drugs, Society, and Human Behavior. And his book, High Price, was the 2014 winner of the Penn Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. Ira Glasser has been a leader in drug policy reform for over 50 years, beginning in 1967 when he joined the New York Civil Liberties Union, becoming its director from 1970 to 1978, and later when he became the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, retiring in 2001. As chairman of the board from 2000 to 2015 of the Drug Policy Alliance, the nation's leading organization promoting policy alternatives to the drug war, Ira provided leadership and inspiration, placed the drug policy reform movement in the historical context of other great political struggles for personal freedom and social justice. A pivotal civil liberties and rights issue that was also central was sensible criminal justice, public health, economic, and foreign policy. Perhaps the best way to introduce our guests and understand this show better is to read directly from Paul's new book, Introduction, Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty, Here. All right, this is not a book promoting drug use, nor is it a how-to book. Today, more than 30 million Americans report using an illegal drug on a regular basis. Drugs don't need an advocate. I wrote this book to present a more realistic image of the typical drug user, a responsible professional who happens to use drugs in his pursuit of happiness. Also, I wanted to remind the public that no benevolent government should forbid autonomous adults from altering their consciousness, as it does not infringe on the rights of others. I use personal anecdotes and scientific research, my own and others, to dispel drug myths and to illustrate the many potential benefits of responsible drug use. After reading this book, I hope you will be less likely to vilify individuals merely because they use drugs. That thinking has led to an incalculable number of deaths and an enormous amount of suffering. I hope you will come away with an appreciation for the prodigious potential good derived from drug use and a deeper understanding of why so many responsible grown-ups engage in this behavior. So, welcome. I'm so glad, Carl and Ira, there you are. Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure and an honor. This is an incredibly important book. It's a book that takes off from High Price, isn't it? It's a journey further than what you were trying to do in High Price, right, Carl? And so perhaps we can start by just giving us a general overview of what you were trying to accomplish. And then, Ira, how did you get to know Carl and work together on this project as well? So, Carl, great to see you, and Ira, great to see you.
Great to see you, Tim, and always great to see Ira, of course. Um, Happy to be here with you too. Um, yeah, this book is really just the continuing development or a continuation of my development in terms of how I think about these issues, how I think about being an American, how I think about liberty. And the major argument of this book can be kind of found in the subtitle, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear. The book really interrogates this question about what it means to be an American. What do we mean when we say that we are guaranteed or we enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I use drugs as a topic to see whether or not we are living up to that promise, that ideal. And one of the things that we come away with, in which you don't need me really to come to help you understand that we are not, when it comes to drugs or people's right to use drugs, we are not living up to that the sort of promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's a simple premise. I deal with the so-called opioid crisis. I deal with a wide range of drugs, ranging from the psychedelics to the amphetamines to new psychoactive substances, a wide range of substances. And of course, I deal with the war on drugs. I deal with racism. You cannot deal with this subject without thinking about racism and talking about racism. But it's not only limited to the United States. This book looks at drug use and how we are dealing with drug policies more globally. And so I'm interested to know what you think, Ira, what you think, Jim, and we can get into it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, Ira, how did you meet Carl? When did you start working with Carl at the Drug Policy Alliance?
Well, yeah, at the Drug Policy Alliance. I guess, Carl, must have been in the early '90s, and it was at a conference. I was chairing the board then of the Drug Policy Alliance, and every 2 years we ran this big national conference with 1,000, 1,500 people coming, and all kinds of panels of discussants of various aspects of the drug war and of drugs, and I just happened to run into Carl there, who was invited to be one of the speakers, as I recall, and on the program I saw that there was this neuroscientist from Columbia talking about the neuroscience of drugs and drug use. And that was not anything that I knew a lot about. I mean, I knew a lot about the law. I knew a lot about the philosophy.
I knew a lot about the struggles with police and the criminalization of people who used substances that were forbidden. But I was always looking to learn more about the technical and scientific aspects of drugs. That was the kind of thing I was interested in at these conferences, because there was no point in going to listen to stuff I already knew. So I went to the panel where Carl was presenting, and that's where we first met. But I think our very first discussion after we met was about basketball, because we were both sort of players, or wished we were players, and we both kind of grew up in the streets playing ball, and Carl in Miami and I in Brooklyn, and so we kind of bonded around issues that had nothing to do with drug policy at all. And then later, Carl joined the board of the Drug Policy Alliance, and so we saw each other infrequently, but on a regular basis, and had a lot of discussions and policy discussions and agreements about the issue of drug policy. So that was our origin story.
Ira, so in addition to a Brooklyn Dodger, I thought you were a baseball guy, but now, all right, in addition, it's basketball as well.
Well, I couldn't find, when I got to be in my 40s, I couldn't find 18 people to play baseball with, space to do it. So I migrated to what was then my third best sport, and the one I came to latest, the first two being baseball and football. I could just go down to the local schoolyard and play with the kids. And since I was in pretty good shape and kept playing, I was able to do that. Not matching them by skill, but matching them by stamina. And so I ended up in my 40s playing very little baseball, a little bit of touch football, but mostly basketball. And that sort of became my main sport. But yes, baseball was always my first and truest love. You're right.
Well, maybe after the virus, we'll all get together and have a game here. But Carl, brain science, right? All those, I've seen you in a number of interviews talk about these pretty pictures, and isn't it true in the physical sciences, the attempt to understand behavior by resorting to some sort of master theory that explains it all, right? That there's a one-to-one correlation, whatever it may be. Brains, certain inadequacies in the brain or whatever causes this or that behavior to occur. So in the social sciences, as a social scientist, it's much, much more complicated. Variability is, in a sense, the norm. There's so much variability in human behavior, it's impossible to find one sort of variable, a constant variable. Is that what you were also up against when you were debating and dialoguing with some of the leading neuroscientists who were trying to portray an understanding of brain science and the connection to drug addiction?
I think many scientists, brain scientists included, they understand that it's complicated. Like you said, it's just like the social sciences. You have to think about the conditions under which an effect occur. Does it occur does the same effect occur when you change the conditions? All of the variables that are needed to cause that effect. They understand the complexities that are involved, but just like anything, people try to make it as simple as possible. They try to present a picture that is simple as possible. It helps with their funding, a wide range of things. But I think a number of people, even in the brain sciences, they know that it's really complicated and complex. But sometimes people oversimplify it to help the audience. But then sometimes people oversimplify it to facilitate an argument, and that's where people get in trouble.
Well, is it also the struggle for funds, and how does that impact on the way in which research is done? It concentrates on brain disease, and your book is talking about the typical uh, responsible drug user. That is not a vision that is often portrayed in the media or in that scientific world, correct?
Yeah, the vast majority of people who use any drugs, they are not addicts. They are just regular people. They're going about handling their business in a way that we expect people to do. They are happy. They are contributors to their community. They are just regular folk. But when we think about drugs, filmmakers are a big sort of violator of this. They present these simplistic views of people who use drugs for the drama, because people will watch your film. There is drama. People who write, the writers in the media, they are looking for the drama. It's a lot more interesting to read about some person who has ruined their lives as a result of doing heroin, as opposed to writing about the woman who does heroin on a regular basis, but she takes care of her responsibilities. That's not sexy. And so we have had this disproportionate focus on folks who are having problems with drugs. And when you focus disproportionately on people who are having problems, now you also have work for the liberals. The liberals can save people. That's what they want to do. And so everybody's participated in this sort of thing. We're all guilty of this, but it's not realistic. It's not the reality of the situation. It's to make us ourselves feel better.
So, Ira, yeah, get in there on the liberal vision here, wanting to help therapeutically, but that can also be very challenging and very harmful as well, correct?
Well, it can, because the urge to help and the belief that you are a good person seeking to do good and to help people can also easily become an instrument of tyranny, where you decide that you know better what's best for that person over there, and enough so you're prepared to put him in jail where you can force him to be helped by you. You know, as somebody who did not grow up studying neuroscience or studying really any kind of discipline that was relevant to this, I always saw it as differently. I always wondered, well, you know, I see people drinking alcohol around me all the time. I saw it as a kid when my parents drank wine. I saw it with friends who were Catholics who drank wine at services. I saw it in movies where people drank martinis all the time. Nobody thought that was a problem. At the same time, I knew that a certain percentage of people who used alcohol used it compulsively and excessively in a way that turned them into alcoholics and made their life very problematic. And with respect to eating, I mean, I was always an enthusiastic eater, and I liked a lot of red meat, and I liked a lot of vanilla fudge ice cream. And later, as I grew up, I learned that those things were not so good for you, but I kept eating them. I moderated it a little bit, but I also knew that there were people who were compulsive eaters and who were terribly obese and who had all kinds of health problems as a result of their excessive eating habits. And it always confused me as to why it wasn't a crime to eat too much ice cream or too much red meat, or to drink too much alcohol. But it was a crime to take any other drug that the government had decided needed to be prohibited, so that if somebody smoked a joint of marijuana once in a while, in the same way that I had a glass of wine with dinner once in a while, they were considered to be a criminal. And what Carl is talking about the way the movies and television presented this problem, they presented the problem of using drugs as if everybody who used drugs was an alcoholic, as if they had treated alcohol. When you looked at the old Nick and Nora movies, Dashiell Hammett movies, they are constantly, he and his wife are constantly drinking martinis. I mean, 8, 10, 12 martinis at a time, and it doesn't seem to interfere with his abilities to catch criminals. It doesn't seem to interfere with their abilities to have a good marriage. It doesn't interfere with anything. It seems it is portrayed as a social lubricant. But in the field, if you go outside of alcohol and you go into marijuana or heroin or any other kind of drug, every image I ever saw growing up, I don't mean most, I mean every image I saw, portrayed the use of drugs as if everybody who used alcohol was an alcoholic. And as if you took one sip of wine, just one, you were down the road toward alcoholism. Now, all of my experience was different. So I began to wonder, what is this about? And later on, I found out with something I didn't know as a young person growing up. I found out that morphine, which was a medicinal painkiller that we all knew about, was pharmacologically pretty much the same as heroin. Now, that was not something I ever learned from any movie I ever watched or any book I ever read, or anybody that had anything publicly about it. So I'm thinking, if one shot of heroin turns you into a hopeless addict, why didn't my sister, who had morphine for 10 days or 2 weeks in the hospital after surgery, come out as an addict? And nobody had an answer for that. So I began to think that this was all irrational, that somebody had categorized a certain kind of substance as deadly and criminal and one drop will kill you, and other kinds of substances as very different, as things that normal people could use in moderation, and only as a minority of them became problematic. And then I learned about alcohol prohibition, and the same thing had happened. And when you criminalize people who use substances for all kinds of reasons and who use them in moderation, when you turn them into criminals and you turn the consumption and selling and buying of those substances into crimes, you don't solve anybody's problem, and you create all kinds of other problems. You create Al Capone. And that's what I was seeing with the drug trade. And then later, I discovered that not only was this terrible in general, but that criminalizing drug use gave the police the discretionary power to decide who to go after when they went after drug use. And guess what? In our society, where everything is part of the heritage of racial discrimination and subjugation in the society, I just started to discover that most of the people they went after were Black. And I knew that the usage rates of these drugs among whites was at least the same. My own teenage kids smoked marijuana. And when I asked them if they had ever been approached by a cop in the street, on their way to school, on the weekends, in Central Park, anywhere, none of them had ever been even approached by a cop, much less searched, much less arrested. But they had Black friends, and every one of their Black friends had been harassed multiple times, searched multiple times, frisked multiple times, arrested multiple times. And a lot of them ended up in jail as a result of the same behavior that my kids were doing without anybody bothering them. And I began to tell my kids, listen, if you want to smoke marijuana, you got to do two things. You got to do it moderately so that it doesn't control you. I mean, you have a beer once in a while, that's okay. But if you wake up every morning and drink 3 bottles of vodka before you go to school, that's not okay. And you got to worry about, you got to moderate your use. And the other thing is, don't do it in public because I don't want you to be vulnerable to arrests. And I know you're white and you're not likely to be approached by a cop, but, you know, I'm out there fighting with the cops all the time in my job at the ACLU, and the cops would love to arrest my son. So do it inside. And if you want to do it at home, you do it at home. But what I was trying to do was protect them from both destructive use on the one hand, the same way I would protect them from destructive use if they were eating too much ice cream or drinking too much beer or smoking. And on the other hand, I was trying to protect them from the law. And the problems that were created by the law were invented problems. They didn't come from drug use. They came from the decision by the government to criminalize certain drugs, but not others. And that sort of got me into the whole issue of whose business is it anyway? And why should the government ever have the power to tell you what you can put into your own body? And when people told me, well, you got to save people from themselves, which a lot of liberals thought, I asked them whether the government needed to save people from overeating. And I usually asked that to people who were obviously overeating. I mean, you know, right. There was, and nobody had an answer for that because it's fundamentally an irrational distinction that the government and the law has made. So that's what kind of got me.
Carl, your experience, Carl, in Miami was somewhat different, correct? And you initially thought you were going to save your community in a sense through your studies of about brain science, right? How did all this?
In the last book, High Price, I dealt with that issue in terms of how we all drank the Kool-Aid of the 1980s, thinking that crack destroyed the Black community. Never mind, crack didn't show up until like 1985, and we had the highest unemployment rates in 1982, and we had peak murder rates in 1980, a peak in 1980, but yet crack was blamed for these problems that were there before crack even arrived on the scene. So yeah, I believe that initially, but I came to see that I was being hoodwinked just like everyone else. I came to see that what the war on drugs really was, and we don't talk about it in these terms, but the war on drugs was merely a jobs program, and it is a jobs program. It's a jobs program to replace like those factory jobs that left the Rust Belt, that left Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, even Maine. All of those jobs that left, you had to replace them, and we hired more cops, and that meant that more typically white guys were being hired. And their jobs were being predicated on incarcerating Black and brown bodies, and the industries that were propped up around the prisons that were built, restaurants, hotels, all of them, they were in on it. The politicians were in on it. And so, yeah, I came to that conclusion. And then once you realize that, then you have to start like really dealing with, well, are drugs really that dangerous? And then when you start to evaluate, you start to see that much of this stuff has been exaggerated. Not to say that some people don't get in trouble with drugs, because some people do. Just like some people get in trouble with driving their car too fast. Just like some people get in trouble with overeating. All of these activities that have potential dangers, but we're not banning these activities like we have chosen to ban drugs. And so the new book basically makes the argument that, wait, when you really look at the effects that drugs produce, you can't help but come away with the conclusion that the predominant effects produced by drugs like cocaine, marijuana, heroin, MDMA, the predominant effects are positive. People enjoy these drugs. They enhance interactions, as Ira talked about these social lubricants. They also help people to be more magnanimous, more forgiving, more open, more empathetic. All of these things they help with. And it's like, well, if we have these compounds, why aren't we taking advantage of it? Well, the answer to that is that some people are taking advantage of it, and with relative immunity, particularly some of our privileged class. They're using these drugs. Don't get it twisted, because they are using them, but they have enough resources to insulate themselves from any criminal justice consequences. So the people who are really being negatively affected by this are poor people on the margins of our societies. They're the ones who are really subjected to our sort of prohibitionist sort of approach to drugs. And so I'm trying to get people to see, particularly those folks who are using drugs and they're in the closet. I'm trying to get people to come out of the closet so we can change this image of the typical drug user as being some irresponsible degenerate. That's just simply not the case for the vast majority of drug users. And so when those folks, the liberals, when they get out of the closet, we can actually begin to change this image. And then it would be a lot more difficult to vilify folks who can't help but be identified as drug users. Then you can no longer vilify that person who has no resources for their drug use. You have to deal with their problems. For example, it's progressive to say, hey, I support supervised consumption facilities. I support those things. And it's like, as if that's progressive. It's not progressive, because nobody wants to use their drugs in public. We would all like to use our drugs in our own private space. And so if you had a home, you would do that. So how about supporting these people getting housing? How about supporting these people getting education? How about supporting them having gainful employment, as opposed to focus on their drug use, focus on the problems that are the real problems?
So the drug war is a vehicle by which we scapegoat people and avoid really tackling the structural issues, as you point out, employment and education and health and so on. So the
drug war is a jobs program. That's foremost. It's a jobs program.
And Carl, it isn't just a jobs program for police and for prison guards and for judges and lawyers and the whole infrastructure that prohibition creates. It's also, and tragically, the only jobs program for minority youth that the country has ever had. Now, when I say it's a jobs program for minority youth, I was once speaking at a church in Harlem in the early 1970s. I was speaking against the Rockefeller drug law, which was then pending. And the audience was entirely black, mostly women, mostly mothers of kids who were in danger on the streets. And they were furious with me because they said their kids were being drawn into the drug trade. And here I was opposing legislation that was designed to stop the drug trade. And I asked this one woman, how old is your son? He's 13. And I said, and is he out there selling drugs? Yeah, he transports drugs for bad guys on the street. And I said, and how much do they pay him for that? He says, well, sometimes he gets like $300 a day. And I said, and what's your source of income? She says, oh, I'm on welfare. And I said, well, what do you think is drawing your 13-year-old son into this trade? Do you think it's the drugs? Is he addicted to the drugs? or is he addicted to the money? She says, no, 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 it's the $300 a day that he can make. Right? I said, because he can't make that working for $4 an hour at McDonald's after school, right? And she says yes. And I said, well, you know why he's 13 and he's being drawn into this? She says, why? I said, because the law so severely punishes people 18 and over for trafficking in drugs, for selling drugs, that the drug trade, the illegal drug trade, has moved to using younger kids, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, because they are not subject to the adult criminal laws. And it's safer to use them than to use an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old who can be sent away for 25 years if he's caught. Your kid is getting drawn into this because of drug prohibition. And
yeah, but I want to make sure that we get this on the record. There is a myth about the amount of money that these kids were making. When all the studies were done, they were making about the same amount as they would have been making in fast food restaurants. So that myth drove many of the sort of restrictive over policing in these areas. It just simply wasn't true. I mean, it's true that it's certainly more appealing to be in the trade if you're a young kid than to go to McDonald's where some pedantic white guy is telling you what to do as opposed to hanging out with your friends. Of course, that's more appealing. But let's just be clear that the amount of money that people said that they were out there making, that just simply wasn't true.
Everybody believed it was true at the time. So.
They still believe it today, and that nonsense is being perpetuated. The myth, that's why the myth won't die. I mean, I had, at that time, 1986, I was 20 years old. My friends out of high school, they were all talking about how much money they were making. And then, I come hang out with them on the corner, and they all are living at home with their mom. They didn't have cars, but yet they were making all this loot. Come on. And it defies logic. But this is the story that continues to be told, and it just simply was not true.
So, Carl, for our audience, help us understand some of the distinctions you're making here. Are you talking about decriminalization? Are you talking about full legalization of all these drugs with certain controls? Spell that out for our audience so we really understand what you're driving.
Yeah, so in terms of my drug policy looks like an American. We say that we believe in this Declaration of Independence that guarantees each of us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If that's the case, then I have the right to go and use the substances that I seek. Now, the government's role is the same role that it has in terms of my food, to make sure that there is a quality substance, to make sure that they control the unit dose, make sure that there is some sort of requirement before I can engage in this activity. For example, if I want to drive a car, I have to have a driver's license. I have to be of a certain age. I have to obey the speed limit. I wear a seatbelt. All of these requirements, that's the role of the government. So, and how would that look for something like heroin? That simply means that we will make sure that the unit dose, the dose that's in each package or what have you, is not an amount that's going to kill somebody. We do this with alcohol. We do this with tobacco. We do this with all of these products. We can do the same with heroin. You have to be a certain age before you purchase a substance. Maybe there is a requirement in terms of a test that you have to take in order to know something about how not to mix it with other particular substances. So my point, the thing that I advocate for is full legal regulation, so Americans can enjoy the rights that we have been guaranteed. If that's not the case, well, we should maybe get rid of that rhetoric. That's all it becomes. It's rhetoric if we're not going to live by it.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know this still, but during alcohol prohibition, most of the people who died from drinking alcohol, or who were paralyzed or blinded or otherwise disabled were not because they were drinking too much alcohol. It was because, under terms of criminal prohibition, the government could not regulate what the contents were. So if you bought a bottle of some alcoholic drink, you had no idea what was in there, because that was not controlled by government regulation. That was controlled by the criminals who marketed it.
But if you read the new book, it's in the new book. But also, the government was putting methane in industrial alcohol. Industrial alcohol was being stolen by the cartels, if you will, in order to produce drinkable alcohol. But the government was putting methanol in that industrial alcohol, which also led to a lot of deaths and maiming of American citizens. I write about this in the new book. And so that's one of the things that your audience can go and check out. But you're absolutely right, Ira. We had tens of thousands of Americans who lost their life as a result of tainted alcohol. And then that all ended when the 21st Amendment took effect in 1934. It all ended because now we have a quality control alcoholic beverage. And people say that, well, with alcohol, what happened was that we reversed prohibition because it didn't work. That's not why we reversed prohibition. We reversed prohibition because the American public thought that the taxes generated from alcohol revenue would get rid of the income tax. That's why we reversed the 18th Amendment. And that's why today marijuana legalization is growing in a number of states, because people see the potential tax revenue. It's really about the tax revenue. And the same sort of thing can be done with something like heroin, with something like MDMA. All of these drugs, we can certainly take the money from the revenue to help increase jobs, help with the various problems that we have in the society. That's what we're trying to do with marijuana in many places.
Yeah, right. Well, it's also the case that with respect to alcohol prohibition, before prohibition, there was no income tax. Carl is absolutely right about that. And the main tax that generated revenue for the federal government was federal excise taxes. And the biggest single chunk of that was excise taxes on the sale of alcohol. When prohibition came in, the government lost that revenue, because now all the revenue from the sale of alcohol went to criminal cartels. And the income tax was instituted around the same time as alcohol prohibition was instituted, to replace federal revenue from the excise tax with the income tax. A lot of very rich, conservative, wealthy, and corporate interests wanted to get rid of that income tax. And they were the moving force, one of the moving forces behind the repeal of prohibition. And one of the reasons that they became so so virulently opposed to Franklin Delano Roosevelt after prohibition was reversed was that they expected the income tax to go away, and it didn't. And so the revenue issues have always been at the root of this, plus a kind of a legalized morality. The basic principle here that's learned from the history of alcohol prohibition, is that you cannot regulate what you're trying to prohibit.
Right. I want to get into that too. That's an important point. We just have about 4 or 5 minutes to go, but I want to touch on that. Paul, you've pointed out in the book a number of European models that are working. I wonder if you could comment on that, and also about this issue of morality and the Puritan morality that we are still grappling with today, and that the impact that it has on what you've been discussing here.
Yeah, like I was saying, people do substances, these drugs, in order to enhance pleasure and happiness, a wide range of things. And as H.L. Mencken once remarked, that this sort of puritanical viewpoint is the notion that someone somewhere is having fun. That sort of American puritanical view is what one of the sort of driving forces behind our sort of restricting of these drugs. That's one thing. When we think about what other countries are doing, some countries are doing it a lot better than us. The Swiss, none of these countries, by the way, have legally regulated everything. They have some form of decriminalization, but all of them, none of them are arresting their populations for using drugs. That's an American thing. That's a thing that America has exported to some of the countries that depend upon our aid. But places like Switzerland, the Netherlands, they're not arresting large numbers of their
Portugal.
citizens. Portugal, of course, Portugal decriminalized drugs in 2001. It took effect, but the Spanish had decriminalized drugs throughout their history, but nobody talks about it because Portugal had a better marketing sort of scheme. Other countries also have decriminalized drugs, but Portugal gets all of the sort of conversation at this moment. In Oregon, November, this past November, they decriminalized everything. They're the only state that has done it. So it's going to be interesting to watch Oregon and see how that plays out, which is going, how I predict it will play out is that it would be unremarkable. You won't even notice it. But they have, the citizens of Oregon have taken that important step of saying, we're not arresting our citizens for using drugs because it's ridiculous. We do it here in many places in the country, in part because it's a jobs program. You have to show progress. Progress is the number of arrests you have. Police, I mean, the politician can say we're hiring police and we're getting drugs out of your community, although that'll never happen. And nobody actually wants that as a goal because we all like our psychoactive substances. And so it will be interesting to see how it plays out in Oregon. We'll see whether or not other American citizens step up to the plate and say, hey, this is ridiculous.
That's the point. And now, yes, will other American citizens stand up? What do you think are the chances of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, or millions, if not hundreds of thousands of people coming out of the closet, taking that moral stand that you're talking about? Reverend William Barber talks about this, standing in the breach. This is a moral issue now at this point. This is a movement that you're helping to lead, Carl and Ira, and so on. So what are the chances, you think, that the professionals, the middle class, the people are going to come out and take that stand and come out of the closet?
I hope they come out. You know, everybody, when I give talks all over the world, people say, what can I do? And then so I had to think about what can people do? And the only thing I'm asking people to do, just get out of the closet. And then people, I have never had such a vociferous opposition to something that I ask people to do from people on my side. They don't like it because it requires something of a risk of them. And if we know anything about history, anything worth having or doing or changing requires a risk. And so it will be interesting. Ara, what do you think? Do you think people will come out of the closet?
Very slowly. I mean, they have come out of the closet with respect to marijuana, but
not marijuana. Not marijuana. I mean,
I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody who's prepared to come out of the closet with respect to cocaine use or heroin use or MDMA. People are basically afraid because as long as it remains criminally prohibited, they don't want to subject themselves to a loss of their job or a loss of their liberty. Now, we'll see what happens in Oregon. Now that they're not going to arrest anybody in Oregon, we'll see whether or not more people come out of the closet. But it's still a federal crime, remember. All Oregon did was racism as a state offense.
It's wrong. It's wrong. The bottom line is that it's wrong. And people, they have these heroes like Martin Luther King and those folks.
Absolutely.
They were actually highlighting
a moment, as you put it.
Yeah,
Charles.
it is. It is.
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, and I'm not putting myself on any sort of pedestal. I was the only professor that took a stand against the stop and frisk issue 12 years ago, whenever the trial was. Not one of these characters, my colleagues, would come out again to protect themselves in their vast careers. And so that's a whole other thing. We won't get into that, but listen, this is a different time. I think what you need to do is also connect to larger civil rights movements like the Poor People's Campaign. We need to get Michelle Alexander, Cornell, West on this, and make this a broad-based movement. Correct? In the last 30 seconds we've got. Would you agree?
Well, they know where I'm at.
All right. Right, Ira?
Well, yes, if you can get people to overcome the stigma that the drug war itself has created, that's the problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can go on for a long, long time. This has been great. I love seeing you again. Take care. God bless you all. Stay strong. Stay well. And thank you again so very, very much for a terrific show. Carry on. And thank you so very, very much, Carl and Ira, and all of you for watching us this week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. Take care.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ira.
Thank you very much. And enjoy your drugs. Be happy. Be happy.